Firstly, a huge thank you. That was actually probably better than my talk, Richard, to be honest, so I appreciate your kind words. Also, just to say what a privilege it is really to be here on a day like today talking about the women's game. I don't claim to be an expert in my topic that I'm going to talk about, but certainly something that I feel very passionately about in order to support player development. I'm also concerned about the amount of slides I've got now, Joe, especially with those. Okay, so a bit of a background around what we're going to talk about. So a bit of a understanding about who I am. The majority of you, I believe I've lectured, so I apologise in advance to hear my voice again. Why I chose this topic, who parents actually are, because I think it's a really key thing that we recognise what they do within the game and certainly within the current parameters. My experience within that, and I've got a bit of an embarrassing story, but I'll come on to that later. It's important that we allow parents to have a voice, and again, it kind of goes back and touches upon why I chose this topic, especially in the elite game and the way in which it's growing. Managing their expectations versus what it actually looks like, and then an education around what we do at Chelsea Football Club Women to support those parents. I chose this picture because that was pre-Christmas, and as you can see, that isn't exactly how I look now, but as Richard mentioned, yes, a previous student at St Mary's University, something I'm extremely proud of, where I learned around what you guys are all learning now, which is a huge achievement of mine. I really look back to that, and I recognise that to have the people that we have here right now talking about the issues in the women's game, I think it's nothing that we had before, so how fortunate you are. So why this topic? I think extremely important to recognise that if we get parents' buy-in, how much of an impact, a positive impact we can have upon what players may be able to achieve. So we'll talk about the reasons why, we'll talk about how, and we'll also talk about who parents actually are. They are taxi drivers. It's a fair point. They are expected to take people to and from, even at the elite game, to and from training, to and from games. They are supporters and they're fans. They are critics. They are the first person to tell their daughter or son what they've done well, what they haven't done well, but also thinking that they're their biggest fans. Some of them are coaches, and we have to recognise that, especially when they come to me and suggest what their daughter needs, and I say, okay, when they say, oh, I've got a big coaching background, and that's fine, and we need to recognise that, and how we can support them through it, but understand that whilst they're here with us, how we're there to develop them, and we have their best interests at heart. They invest a huge sum of money in their daughter's development, and that's a huge thing within the women's game, and that's why I find this topic so key. They can be very helpful and embarrassing. They can be opinionated and caring, and they know best / they do not know anything at all. The reason I said this is because even in their most supportive moments, they can be or have a negative effect or an impact on their daughter. An example, and this is my experience, is that once I was playing in a cup final game, I went through on goal when I was about 11 years old. And I used to play football with Tom Hounsell, who's here, and I'm sure everyone knows that he'll be able to back me up on this. And all of a sudden, I hear my mum from the sideline shout, "Go on, Deanie," in front of all of my very, very, very good friends I missed. And I completely remember that moment and put it all back to there. And although I talk about that in a laughing way and a joking matter now, I still remember it. And I think it's really important that we recognise that our sons, our daughters, will remember even the most supportive moments, and how we can recognise and support the parents to understand that. We see players for 2 hours a day, 3-4 times a week. They see them for the rest of the time, which is another reason why they are extremely, extremely key in their son or daughter's development. And it's important that we educate them around that. And I'll come on to some examples of what other clubs may do and what we do. We need them to buy into the programme. Why? Because we need them to recognise what it is we're trying to achieve. It's just about how much you involve them, and that's the biggest key that I've learnt this season from taking over the role as technical director, is the how often do we get them in, what do we share with them, do we want them to be coaches? No. Do we want them to be the biggest fans where they shout out, come on Dini, and people miss big chances and let go of opportunities? Or do we want them to just actually allow their daughter to enjoy their development and develop at the right stage? So it's important we recognise that. How we do certain things, players will each have IDPs and conversations. Between the ages of 10 and 14, we very much heavily involve the parents within that. Between the ages of 16 and 18, we only speak to the players, because it's about time that the players started taking, and you mentioned it earlier around player ownership, they started taking some ownership around their development and some responsibility around those things. We have a code of conduct. I've not yet had to bring out the code of conduct card, but it's important that we recognise and we explain to them what the rules are when they're representing, because they represent this football club as much as the player. We have parent education workshops, and I'll talk about those later. Another football club in London currently are putting players' parents through level 1 qualifications. I personally don't like that, because I think that's a very off-the-shelf product to talk about and maybe give some too much parent voice that we mentioned earlier around what is right and what isn't right. What we need to do, though, is make sure that it's bespoke to what our programme is, and get them to recognise what their expectations are versus what the reality of what it may look like. Can everyone see that grey line? Parents, and 9 out of 10 parents that I speak to believe that development should look extremely much like that, in terms of really smooth, interesting times potentially, but a very smooth support in terms of their development. The reality is, anyone that will know, and certainly those that are starting in their coaching journey will recognise, is that it doesn't look like that at all, and it looks very much like that red one, is that it is going in the right direction, but at times there'll be really big highs, and there'll be also very, very, very low lows, and it's important that we get them to buy into that. Some of the workshops that we will do, we will talk about how players mirror behaviour. We will talk about the journey home. What does it look like? How can we be supportive? How can we ask questions, tell them we love them, rather than ask them and tell them what they need to do better? How do we create a non-excuse culture and build resilience within our players? We'll give them some support around nutrition, around the menstrual cycle, around sleep, and I can answer questions about that later. And the last thing I really wanted to talk about is those simple things to build resilience. Is that at under 10, why should players, and why are we as coaches always in the past afraid to say no? Because we feel like, oh, actually, she's only under 10. If we build that resilience and we support them now, and actually they may be better players in the future and are able to stand up and take responsibility for their development and therefore be a better football player. I'll answer questions at the end. Thank you very much for having me.